Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty interesting. Numerophobia,
Right. Or, what some people call math anxiety.
or arithmophobia, yeah. We've looked at quite a bit of material psychological guides, info from health groups, that sort of thing,
Hmm.
to really get a handle on this fear of numbers.
Yeah,
And our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack the different sides of it, from just a general unease with math
right.
to those really specific fears about certain numbers, and ultimately figure out how it impacts everyday life.
Exactly. I mean, most of us probably grown a bit at a hard math problem, all right?
Yeah, definitely.
But this is, well, it's quite different. Numerophobia or arithmophobia, it's actually a recognized anxiety disorder.
Okay.
It's not just like disliking it. It can cause real distress, real challenges for people.
Okay, so let's start digging into the basics then. Our sources suggest there are like two main ways this fear shows up.
That's right.
First, there's something called generalized arithmophobia. What's that about?
So generalized arithmophobia is basically a fear of all numbers.
All numbers, wow.
Imagine the anxiety someone might feel not just with, say, complex math, but even just reading a clock
Hmm.
or understanding prices, dealing with simple counting. It can be pretty all-encompassing. Affects a lot of daily stuff.
That sounds incredibly difficult. And then, like you said, there's the fear of specific numbers.
Mhm.
And this is where it gets fascinating because our sources point to some really deep cultural, even religious links for these phobias.
Absolutely. These aren't just random dislikes, you
Yeah.
know. The fear of certain numbers often has roots in stories, beliefs, superstitions passed down for ages.
Like 666.
Exactly, like 666. Its association with the Antichrist in the Bible. That's led to a very real phobia for some. Hexacosu-kanta-hexaphobia, it's called.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is. But it shows how loaded the simple number can become, doesn't it?
It really does. And it's not just Western culture, is it? Our info mentions the number 4 in places like China, Vietnam, Japan.
Right.
What's the story there?
Well, what's really interesting there is the sound, the language itself.
Oh.
In those languages, the word for four sounds very, very similar to the word for death.
Ah, okay, I see.
So that creates this really powerful negative link. Leads to tetraphobia for some people.
Tetraphobia. Got it.
And you see it in practice, right? Like
Yeah.
buildings might skip the fourth floor.
Right. Or apartment numbers avoid it.
Exactly. It just shows how language and culture can really shape our gut reactions to something as abstract as a number.
That's such a clear example. And we can't forget the classic unlucky number 13. That has its own name too, right?
Yep. Triskaidekaphobia.
Triskaidekaphobia. Okay.
The exact origins are kind of debated, but some theories link it to the Last Supper, Judas being the 13th guest,
Hmm.
or maybe Norse mythology, a feast with 12 gods, crashed by a 13th troublemaker, Loki.
Interesting.
Whatever the root is, the fear of 13 is, well, it's pretty widespread. You see it in hotel floors, people avoiding doing important things on the 13th.
Yeah.
It really makes you think how these old stories still, have a real impact on people's anxieties today.
Absolutely.
And if you think about performance, these fears can create huge stress, not just in school with math tests, but, professionally too, if your job involves that number.
Right. Makes sense. So, okay, beyond those maybe more well-known ones,
Hmm.
our sources mention a few other specific number phobias, things I hadn't really heard of, like heptadecaphobia, fear of 17,
Yep.
icositiophobia, 23,
Hmm.
and trichotenophobia, fear of 39. That's quite a range.
It is, yeah. And it highlights something important. Even if the cultural reasons behind, say, fearing 17 aren't as famous as for 4 or 13,
Right.
for the person experiencing it, the anxiety is just as real, just as impactful. These aren't just like slight preferences. They can trigger genuine, sometimes debilitating anxiety.
Okay. Now, let's shift gears a little. We also came across something called meganumerophobia. Sounds big.
Yeah, it does. Meganumerophobia is specifically the fear of extremely large numbers.
Like millions, billions.
Exactly. Millions, billions, trillions, you name it.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is people with this usually don't fear smaller, more manageable numbers.
Hmm.
The anxiety seems triggered by the sheer scale, the incomprehensibility of these huge quantities.
Yeah.
It's almost like the mind just can't grasp it.
That makes a strange kind of sense. The sheer size is just overwhelming, too abstract.
Right.
Our sources even mentioned a possible link to the idea of eternity for some people with this. Why would that be?
Well, for some, these incredibly large numbers can bring up feelings about, well, infinity. endlessness. And
Oh,
that can tap into some pretty deep, maybe unsettling questions about existence, the limits of understanding, which can be terrifying for some.
right.
And that also connects to apeirophobia, the fear of infinity itself. There's definitely some overlap there in the kind of anxiety people feel.
Okay, so we've covered the different types, the cultural stuff, the fear of huge numbers, but what does it actually feel like for someone going through this? What are the symptoms?
Yeah, the symptoms of arithmophobia are very similar to other anxiety disorders, actually.
Okay.
When someone with this phobia faces numbers, or even just thinks about dealing with them, they can have some very real physical reactions.
It's not just in their head then.
Not at all. It really shows this isn't just mental discomfort, it hits the body too.
And the symptoms can be pretty intense, right? Our sources listed things like chills, dizziness,
Lightheadedness, yeah.
excessive sweating,
Heart palpitations, feeling sick.
nausea, shortness of breath, definitely,
Mm.
trembling or shaking, upset stomach.
Wow. That's a full body reaction.
It is. It's not just feeling a bit uneasy, it's a physiological response. It really underlines the intensity of the anxiety. And, like our sources say, the exact symptoms, how strong they are, that can vary a lot from person to person.
Okay, so if someone is dealing with this kind of anxiety around numbers, what can they do? What are the treatment options?
Well, the good news is, because it's a type of anxiety disorder, the usual treatments for anxiety often work really well here.
Like therapy. Exactly. One common one is exposure therapy.
Okay, how does that work?
The basic idea is gradual controlled exposure to numbers, but in a safe, supportive setting.
Right.
So the person learns, step by step, through positive experiences, that the numbers themselves aren't actually harmful. It helps desensitize the fear response.
Makes sense. Gradually face the fear. What about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT? We hear about that a lot for anxiety.
Yeah, CBT is very common too.
Yeah.
It focuses more on identifying and uh, challenging the negative thoughts and behaviors linked to the fear.
So changing how you think about numbers.
Pretty much. Working with a therapist, you learn coping strategies, ways to reframe those negative associations, and develop healthier ways to interact with numbers.
Okay. And besides talking therapies, our info also mentioned hypnotherapy and maybe medication.
Yes, hypnotherapy can be helpful for some. It uses guided concentration, relaxation techniques to help manage those anxiety responses.
Mm.
And sometimes, yes, medication might be used, usually prescribed by a doctor to help reduce the overall anxiety levels, often alongside therapy, not usually on its own.
Right. So bringing it all together then, it's clear numerophobia is way more than just not liking math class.
Definitely.
It's a real anxiety disorder. It shows up in different ways, general fear, specific number phobias, sometimes tied to culture.
Hairtide, yeah.
And it can seriously impact daily life. But importantly, there are effective ways to treat it.
Precisely. Understanding this really helps us see how varied anxiety can be and how important it is to, acknowledge and address these fears, even if they seem unusual to others.
Absolutely. And maybe that leads to a final thought for you, the listener. Just consider for a moment how completely pervasive numbers are in our lives.
Everywhere.
Checking the time, checking the weather, managing money. They're everywhere. So if something that seems so basic, so universal, can be a source of real anxiety for some, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other common parts of our world might be triggering hidden anxieties or challenges for the people around us? Things we might not even notice. What else is out there?